Fantastic. Good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started. I have the honor of trying to keep us on time. So it's 9:30. We're going to go ahead and jump in. Good morning. My name is Shannon Holson. I'm the Chief of Policy at the National Council on Teacher Equality. Over the past four and a half years, I've worked at NCTQ. Prior to that, I worked at the Delaware Department of Education. I've also been a district leader working with teachers and principals and their school leadership teams to help improve instruction. I'm very excited to be here with this awesome panel we have here this morning to talk about math. In honor of Christy, I'm going to start with a math joke. If any of you know Christy in math, and Christy at ExcelinEd. So what did the 0 say to the 8? Yep. Nice belt. All right. So that was a quick one I can remember. So we're going to dive in, and first, to make sure you're in the right session, today we all know that our NAEP math data is pretty discouraging, but we also know that there's solutions and there's a lot that we can do to make it better, and it doesn't have to be this way. So we're going to be diving in, talking about a lot of potential action states can take to help improve math instruction and build teacher capacity. I'm going to do a brief introduction of our esteemed panelists today. First, we have Lindsay Henderson. Lindsay serves as the Policy Director for Math at ExcelinEd. Most recently, she worked at the Utah State Board of Education as a secondary mathematics specialist and helped to drive math innovations across the state of Utah. This work also included leading the first ever data science pilot, the development and implementation of Utah's PK-12 mathematics framework, and engaging stakeholders in defining the math for everyone that builds empowerment through engaged citizenship. She's also served on several advisory panels, including the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine, the Conference Board of Mathematical Sciences, and she was honored to be recognized for outstanding strengths in educational leadership by the Women Tech Council's Women Tech Awards. So, happy to have Lindsay here with us today.
Thank you so much. As you were reading that, I was like, who is this Lindsay Henderson person? Thank you.
Love math. Next, we have Dr. Patty Norman, who serves as the Deputy Superintendent of Student Achievement. She's responsible for programs, departments, and initiatives leading towards innovative efforts in closing achievement and opportunity gaps and increasing student learning in the state of Utah. Prior to her work at the Utah State Board of Education, Dr. Norman worked in public education as a teacher, math specialist, math supervisor, digital curriculum supervisor, and director of curriculum instruction. She knows her math. Welcome, Dr. Norman. Next, Brenda Berg, a first-generation college student. Brenda is the president and CEO of Best NC, which stands for Business for Educational Success and Transformation in North Carolina. Got that out in one breath, nice Brenda. A nonprofit, nonpartisan coalition of over 100 business leaders with a focus on making education in North Carolina the best in the nation. She has over 30 years of experience as a business owner, a public policy professional, education advocate, and she leads the overall Best NC vision, strategy, and operations while leveraging her expertise in business. To have that business to education, close that business to education bridge in Best NC's work to transform education in North Carolina. Thanks for being here, Brenda. And last but certainly not least is Patrick Jones, who is the Senior Vice President on Leadership, Equity, and School Growth at Mind Trust. Dr. Patrick Jones leads the Mind Trust implementation of talent development strategy and racial equity priorities and commitments. Before joining the Mind Trust, Dr. Jones served as Director of Secondary Schools for the Tinley Accelerated Schools, where he coached principals and oversaw the development of instructional systems at the Indianapolis-based network of charter schools. He also has some pretty proven results. Under his leadership, the school earned 4 consecutive A letter grades on the Indiana School Accountability Framework. And before becoming principal in the classroom, Dr. Jones, at the school where he taught, he led the improvement of his 8th grade students' algebra end of course assessment pass rate from 45% to 91% proficiency. So, great job. We're honored to have you all here today. So, now that we have introduced you to our esteemed panel, let's go ahead and dive in and get to work. So, Lindsay, we're going to start with you. Awesome. So, ExcelinEd has worked with a lot of states, has worked deeply in at least 25 states, half the states across the country. on this topic. When you look at math policy across the states, what are you seeing? What's happening?
Well, this is such an apropos question because we just finished, and by we, ExcelinEd finished a 50-state scan, and we looked at 23 different vectors of state policy that supports math instruction in schools across all 50 states and Washington, D.C. And the findings have been fascinating. They are coming. Watch for results coming soon. But it's interesting to see the silver lining is that every state thinks that math is important, and every state has some sort of policy that supports students mathematically. And we're kind of looking at, I'll back up a little bit, because what we did to determine this work was I started with my wonderful colleague Christy. She started the math policy book that we have at ExcelinEd, and she really looked at the steep decline over the last 10 years in NAEP, and then she also looked for high flyers. Who are the states that are performing well? And what are they doing in terms of state policy to move the needle? And then PISA results came out, and we looked at why is the U.S. ranked where it is, and what are the high flyers, Singapore, Japan, what are they doing in their spheres of influence to support math policy? And then we looked at the evidence base. What does research tell us is important for kids, and how can we leverage that at a policy level? And what our conclusion is kind of like, I think of a big math person, a big Venn diagram, 3 circles. What's the overlap in the middle of all 3 of those, NAEP, PISA, and the evidence base? And we came up with 6 fundamental principles. And if you've done any literacy work or heard about the literacy progress that's kind of swept across the nation, I think you're going to find a lot of coherence. It's fascinating to know that things that support literacy also support math, because literacy and math are so deeply intertwined. Our first fundamental principle is high-quality instructional materials. And in mathematics, it's important to have that Tier 1, the grade-level content for teachers to teach from that is high quality. It is also important for them to have access to intervention materials. We need to help students propel them through the system and to help them bridge the gap between their skills and grade-level content knowledge. And it's important that teachers spend their time planning rather than trying to find resources to teach the math content with. Our second fundamental principle is educator preparation. And we use the word educator because we're talking about teachers, we're talking about district-level math specialists, we're talking about principals and vice principals, we're talking about the whole system. We need the whole system to know what is evidence-based practices for teaching in mathematics and what are evidence-based practices for learning in mathematics. And we also need pre-service teachers. We need those programs really focused on this is what the research says is important for kids, and we need pre-service teachers to not only experience math being taught the way that we want them to teach it, but they need to learn the math that way as well. The third fundamental principle is, this is my favorite one, it is instruction that is informed by assessment. And we want teachers to be given data and information about their students, and then we want them to use that data to adjust instruction to meet all of their students' needs in their classroom. Fourth fundamental principle, it seems simple. I was a little surprised when I saw it. It makes sense. Dedicated daily math instructional time. ExcelinEd recommends K-8. All teachers teach math for 60 minutes a day with a 5-day school week, and that is uninterrupted time for all kids to get their math taught to them. The fifth fundamental principle, we have got to leverage an underutilized resource. Our families and caregivers are so important in the K-8 space. Giving them the tools and the knowledge for how to support their child at home mathematically is really important, and then giving them regular progress updates on how their child is progressing towards grade level content is invaluable. And our sixth fundamental principle, it was just released in August, and you actually have a little card on your chairs that kind of explains it, is automatic enrollment in advanced math. So starting in about 6th, 7th grade, if a student scores proficient or highly proficient on an end-of-level test, they need to be scooped up and put in advanced math. It is as important to intervene when a student struggles. It's also important for those high flyers to keep their enrichment high and their engagement high and get access to advanced math courses. We'll talk a little bit more about it later. So that's the middle of the 3-circle Venn diagram that we've arrived at, and we're really promoting these great places where we're seeing innovation in the states. And so our 50-state scan, the silver lining, everybody's doing something, and every state has room for improvement with math policy.
Thanks, Lindsay. I think that's a good given us the overview of different policy levers we can all be thinking about. Now turning to Patty. So thinking about our early learners, we know math is incredibly important in the early years. Can you talk a little bit about the purpose of Utah's early math screener and how it's designed to enhance early math instruction and what the impact has been for that in Utah?
Yes, I would love to. First of all, I just wanted to get to know the room here. And just so you know, there's lots of seats over in here. If you want to just walk across and sit on down over here, just raise your hand if you have a seat by you. I'm going to do some room control so you guys have a nice seat. There we go. First of all, I bet everyone in this room is here because you absolutely love mathematics. And so give a shout out if you love mathematics. I want to hear it from the entire room. There you go. So I'm going to do something that most people don't do as well, which is I'm going to tell you my age. I am 54 years old, so I'm going to tell you where I came from in mathematics. Being 54, you can judge like she's an old lady, or you can say, oh, she's quite young for that. Either way, I want you to put that as a place mark of what mathematics is. So when I was in school, mathematics was about the worksheet. How many of you remember that? There was probably like 25 questions on that worksheet, and there was 2-story problems at the very end. And you know what? I was a miracle mathematician because I knew how to memorize. That's all I had to do. I didn't have to understand a single thing on that worksheet, but if I could memorize and do it fast, I was the smartest kid in the room. Do you know how terrifying that is? Do you know how terrifying that is? Because if you weren't first, it was just crazy. So all I knew how to do was memorization, recitation, and going through that program, do this, next step, do it as fast as you can do, get it done, and the next day you probably couldn't remember those steps, so you had to be reminded again. But then you got to the 2-story problems on the end, and what did you have to do? Ask for help. And then you could say things like, well, I'm just not good at story problems. Whoever had that experience in mathematics? Okay, a few of you. Now we're to an age where that is no longer a skill that is going to be productive in the area of AI, in the area of data science, and for us to be able to have these mathematical mindsets to be able to do the work we need in the age we live in. So with that, our legislature was bold, they were courageous, and they said math matters. And math matters at every age. So not only are we going to say we need early literacy, we also need early numeracy. Fluency with mathematics, deep problem-solving skills, the mathematical disposition, which is in state statute. You have to have a positive disposition in mathematics, in statute, not just our standards. So they gave the funding to not only have a screener, but also to have coaching, which we'll talk about in a minute. This screener is something that the screener itself and the fact that it is in legislation doesn't move the needle. You can put whatever you want in legislation. You have to have this, you have to have that. But until we're able to do something with the data from the screener, it's of no value. So they put those two things hand in hand. So I'm going to tell you about the screener itself. It's a benchmark screener. We don't like to call it an assessment because assessment, a lot of times people are like, we assess too much. We just assess. Who's heard that? We assess way too much, especially our early learners. But what it really is it's a touch point to be able to say, what is it that they're understanding and what supports do they need? That's a nice tool to have, right? And we're going to give it 3 times a year. We're going to give it early, we're going to give it in the middle, we're going to give it in the end. And guess what? The benchmark screener is something that a teacher can use and looks at it as positive. Like, I need to know where my kids are at. I need to know if they are on track to be able to pass our end of level test in order to be successful for the next grade. So it's really aligned with everything that we do. Not only that, but we do progress monitoring. So this is what it looks like. Screener, initiated, great. You get the results. And guess who we have to report? In statute, we have to report those results to our parents 3 times a year so that they are on board. They know what to do to help support in the classroom, and they know what is most valuable. We get that screener, we get the information. If a student is not on track of where they need to be, then we do progress monitoring. And this isn't the only thing that we do. So I don't want you to think the teachers are just like, okay, here's a screener where they at. No, this is one of a variety of tools. But the screener's importance is this. Before that, every single thing that we did in the early grades was concentrated on literacy, as it should be. Mathematics is its best friend. Mathematics is right there with you. because we are now in an age where there is a literacy involved with our mathematics. It's a way we talk, it's the way we analyze data, it is with everything that we look at and what we're being told. When we look at the things that we're being told in mathematics, we look at, even at a young age, kids can see a graph and they can look at those differences. But what does that mean? What is it trying to say? And so when we look at the screeners, we can go in and we can do a deep dive with progress monitoring in early grades, and that puts them on that pathway to success to be able to then take more complex mathematics as they move along.
Thank you. I love that. Math is literacy's best friend. I love that. So shifting a little bit from our early learners to think about our secondary students, Brenda, can you talk a little bit about the automatic enrollment policy in North Carolina and what key factors led to this policy, and what have the results been in North Carolina?
So what's great is this is not a secondary strategy. This actually starts in 4th grade.
Great.
Which is really exciting. So hi, I'm Brenda Berg. I'm with Best NC. I represent the business community, as you heard. I am not a math instructor, nor am I a former teacher. And so if I can do it, you can do it. On this policy. This is number 6 of Lindsay's list, right? This is the auto enrollment. And I'm going to start with a story as well. There was a young man named Michael. It's not his real name, but I've got some Michaels in the audience. So, in North Carolina, in 5th grade, you move to middle school in 6th grade. And in 6th grade, he gets into the school building and he's realizing there's this advanced math class. And he says, I want to do that. And he goes to his teacher and says, can I do that? No, this is just, it's too hard for you. I'm a pretty smart kid. I want to do this. So he calls his parents. His parents are divorced. They call the principal. The principal says, no, this is just not really for you. And then they keep elevating it. It gets to the point for months they're negotiating whether Michael can take this advanced math class. They bring in church leaders. And the church leaders say, we're going to bring him in. Once we're going to hire tutors for him. We're going to come check in with you once a month so he can take this math class. He finally concede. Months go by, guess what? No tutors needed because Michael is tutoring the other kids in the class. Michael, real human being, was put in the advanced math class, did really well in school, and last year he graduated from Yale. Right? But it took 2 dedicated parents, it took people in their church to come and convince. And I'll tell you that principal became one of our principals of the year. Just wanted to tell you that. So this is personal. This is about humans who are being denied access. And as a business community, this is about people that we want to come work for us, right? So before this policy was passed, about 10% of students who were eligible at the highest levels, the threshold, it should be lower, it should be many, many more, but about 10% at the very highest level were not being put into advanced math classes. 10%. That means in this room, 25, 30 of you, you know what, just let's put you here. And what happens when you're really smart and you're in a remedial class or a lower class? You get disruptive, right? So not only are they not, and what we found with the data is you just track out. If we don't catch you at 6th grade, you're done by 8th. If we don't catch you at 8th and 9th, you're done for high school. So North Carolina, thank you to our legislators. We have Representative Blackwell here in the room. We have free AP exams, right? We have a really strong emphasis on the secondary part of it, but we have kids who are not getting there. So what is this policy? It is so easy, so don't make it number 6 on your list. Make it number 1, okay? It's this easy. It's about, 3 paragraphs long. ExcelinEd has done the work. It's all written out for you. We actually, by the time we pulled the pieces together, we passed this unanimously in both chambers in 30 days. Representative Blackwell, I'll call you out again, stood on the floor and said, today, my friends, my colleagues, we have the opportunity to pass a policy truly based on data, right? This is simply data. The only thing you need to pass this policy is testing. Right? You have to know where the kids are. You have to know which kids are not where they need to be. And if you know that, which we did, you don't need more money. There was $0 put into this policy. You don't need more math teachers because guess what? 100% of this room would be going into math classrooms anyway. It's really just a question of, are you going into one notch up or are you not going into one notch up? So I think there's a lot of overthinking about auto-enrollment, that it's too complicated, it's too expensive. What do we do for those kids? Well, those kids are Michael. He doesn't need more help. He just needs to be in that class. And that we ended up passing that really late in a short session, so kids had already been placed, and the estimate is 8,600 kids, even with an out, because it was so late, 8,600 kids were put in the right class, which means that 8,600 kids had been put in the wrong class. So it's a really exciting policy. It's super simple. We just said, you earn it, you get it. We made it really, really simple. The first round was, if you score a 5 on the end of course or the end of grade, you get put into an advanced math class. Only your parents can opt you out. It's that simple. Next year, we came back and had a reporting requirement. So what gets measured, what matters gets measured, whatnot. So we now know exactly where the numbers are. And so we went from 10% not being put into advanced courses to 2%. And we're still going for that 2%. Other thing is there's residual impact. So the first thing you need is data. The second thing you need is an agency that's willing to do it, right? We know of at least one other state that's passed this years ago, after us, we were first, and still hasn't implemented it. So the agency cooperation is incredibly important. And what our agency has done is said, okay, look at all these 5s who are thriving. Let's look at the 4s. Right? So they're now pulling in kids who are 4s or kids who had an off year. My son was a 5, but he had a year where somehow he managed to get a 2 by doing the exam wrong. So they started digging deeper. The second thing that happened is, particularly in middle grades, we started offering advanced courses. Right? Schools started to realize, oh, wait a second, every other school in the state is offering Math 1 for 8th graders and we don't. So now access, just the opportunity for everyone, expanded in the state. And I'll just leave it with actually what Lindsay said. It's amazing how what works for English works for math. It also works the other way. So our hope this year is to expand it to ELA. Math was the easy, low-hanging fruit. 5 was the easy, low-hanging fruit. So the two things that we really need to do is, one, expand to ELA. And over time, we really need to lower the threshold because there are probably tens of thousands more who could be in these classes and could be successful. Estimating, more than 30% of our students should be opted in, and it's only about 14%. So that's kind of the roundup. So again, it's right here. Go do it. Thank you.
Thanks, Brenda. What a great, just think about the access and opportunity. And we were talking earlier about automatic enrollment policies and why hasn't this been, why isn't that just the way we do business in terms of using the data and making sure kids have the access and the opportunity? So thanks for digging in and really giving some concrete examples of what we can do. Now, thinking about some students who might struggle with math, turning the page a little bit, and so, when students do struggle, tutoring has often been a strategy to employ to help those students bridge those gaps. So, Patrick, can you talk a little bit about providing an overview of Mind Trust's current tutoring initiatives and how they're helping foster kids' success in math?
Absolutely. So I live in Indianapolis, Indiana, and that's right, talk about it.
Indiana's deep. Indiana rolls deep.
And what I would say is this. How many of you have ever heard of Kumon? Mm-hmm. Kumon Learning. How many of you have heard of Mathnasium or Huntington? Right? So I did just a drive-by around Center Township, Indianapolis, and there is one Kumon in Center Township, where IPS, where the Indianapolis Public School System is. Now, one of the highest achieving districts in our state is just north of Indianapolis, Carmel Clay Schools. There are approximately 6 Kumons in the vicinity of Carmel High School. I want you to wrap your mind around that. Where kids need the most help, there's one, and it's in Broad Ripple, a relatively affluent neighborhood in Indianapolis. And there are 6 in the one of the most affluent and well-to-do neighborhoods. And so what that says to me is one of the ways we have to attack the issue of kids not being proficient in mathematics is we have to look at three things: policy, what we're all talking about today, practice, what happens in the classroom, and culture. And when I say culture, I mean culture of achievement within our communities, our state, and our spaces. And the way we've done that at the Mind Trust is we've worked with our courageous legislators to attack outside of school time. And the two ways we've done that are two programs. One is called Indiana Learns, and that is a statewide scalable program that provides tutoring to students in Indiana who need the most help. That program gives students, gives parents, and I don't want to say gifts because that's the wrong thing. Parents deserve this money, they're entitled to this money, $1,000 to get the help they need in mathematics for their child with a dedicated and high-quality tutoring partner for that child in rural communities, in our urban communities where they need the help the most. The second program started in Indianapolis. It's called Indiana Summer Learning Labs. It started as, and both programs started in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, where everybody saw the data dip, right? And the state of Indiana said, well, what do we do? And one other program, and this originated from just having conversations at the Mind Trust, how do we involve schools and community partners to educate kids? So during the pandemic, the Mind Trust actually worked with churches, community partners, community centers to put learning centers in those spaces so that kids wouldn't be in their homes learning. Parents could drop them off at these community centers. What happened then was that expanded to the entire city, where we worked with schools and those community centers to get kids access to high-quality curriculum in the summers and dedicated teachers that would make sure that they got the work they needed to thrive, right? Just last year, the state of Indiana worked with the Mind Trust to run something called Expanding What Works, where we moved that Indiana Summer Learning Labs program statewide in partnership with several counties and high-quality partners like the Boys and Girls Club in South Bend, which I think is St. Joe's County, right? And so what we have to understand, for those things to work, we have to have targeted support, meaning we have to know who we're trying to help. We want the rural communities where it's hard to find great teachers, hard to find people who are moving to some of the rural communities in Indiana. We want the large urban communities where it's hard to find teachers who want that rigor of work in their life. We have to make sure that we have high dosage engagement. Students have to be in this consistently. In the tutoring program, Indiana Learns, and in the Expanding What Works, they have to show up. It has to have high attendance. We have to have accessible and flexible delivery. What I mean by that is, in the Indiana Learns work, that's the tutoring work, we have to have in-person options, virtual options, and flexible hybrid options. We have to understand that we're not in students' households, so we have to make sure that we can meet the needs of every student who needs the support. We have to have dedicated community partnerships. Like I told you before, St. Joe's County Boys and Girls Club has been truly instrumental in making sure Expanding What works in northern Indiana. We also have partnerships with 100 Black Men in Indianapolis who had a long-standing school program. I don't know how high quality the curriculum was, but as soon as they partnered with us, they got a high quality curriculum right off the bat. Teachers got training right off the bat. Any diverse populations in there needed support. I imagine everybody's struggling, or most folks are struggling with English language learners in their cities. We give them that training right off the bat to make sure they can run a high-quality 5-week summer program. And the last thing I would say is data-driven improvement. And so when we work with our sites and our schools, we want to know, here's the pre-test, here's the post-test. How much did students learn? How are we tracking this in an intermittent fashion? How are we making sure that every step of the way, we're assessing students and we're making sure they get exactly what they need? And so I would say Indiana Learns and Expanding What Works are two key strategies that we use that are not just regional to Indianapolis specifically, but that are serving students statewide in a high capacity clip. And data just in for the Expanding What Works, we saw a 24% point gain in students in mathematics from their pre-test to their post-test this summer, proving that what we're doing is working and moving the needle for kids.
Thank you, Patrick, for talking about the importance of partnership and community and options and making sure that we're helping those students in many different ways and reaching them in all capacities. And your last point about that gain from pre-test to post-test is, proof that we need assessment to measure our learning, measure our success, make sure that we are meeting student needs. So, Lindsay, turning back to you, we seem to have consensus that assessments are important, that they are used for a variety of purposes, and can help teachers target interventions, know who we need to serve, many different purposes. So how do we make sure the right kinds of assessments and interventions are happening in schools?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. It's like the $1 million question.
Right. I know.
That's amazing.
Fastball.
Well, first of all, I think it's really important that that policy sets a culture for how math is taught and learned in a state. And I have math people running through my mind right now. Like, who's the math people? Who's doing math? And it's amazing because when I'll meet somebody in the grocery store and they ask me what I'm do for a living, and I'm like, oh, do I want to say the M word? Because we're going to talk about how math kept them from some opportunity. It's usually a negative reaction to mathematics. A lot of people don't see themselves in mathematical spaces. And the first place that you can start to make that change is to normalize interventions. It seems simple, but everybody needs help at some point, right? And so saying that it's okay that you need help and I'm here to help you it's a step in the right direction and helps everybody feel like they're welcomed in a mathematical environment. So I would say that our 50-state scan shows that several states require teachers to intervene when a student is struggling based on some sort of data point, usually from a screener or a diagnostic test. And that is the first step to every child achieving mathematical excellence. In terms of assessments, I have a really deep core belief that is driven. It drove me in the classroom. It drove me in every level of my career, and that is that every student that walks through my classroom door knows something. They all bring assets, and they all bring experiences, and they all bring wonderful mathematical funds of knowledge. Math is the one content area that is innate. Kids know, my kids did at least, when I split a cookie, they knew who got the bigger half, right? And that was directly correlated to the amount of love, right, that I had for each of them. But math is an innate ability, and I find it terribly disheartening that by 6th, 7th grade, kids are shut out from that mathematical opportunity, and they don't see themselves in mathematical space. So believing that students know things and then giving teachers the tools to know what those funds of knowledge are. That is what an assessment does. A screener, a diagnostic, it says this is what we're assessing on, this is the learning target, this is your grade level math content, and teachers, here is the information about each of the 30 kids that you have in your class. So the teachers can then use that information to leverage the funds of knowledge and then find out where there's a gap and help and swoop in and say, it's okay, I'm going to get you to grade level excellence. So I think those are the really two important pieces. That's the sentiment behind our screeners philosophy, is that every kid deserves to have access to rigorous math and on grade level math. And normalizing interventions is a really big first step in that process.
Great. Thanks, Lindsay. And I think, in order to do all those things, you need really effective teachers. And I think whether that in and of itself, the teacher workforce, we need to support, attract, retain strong, effective teachers of mathematics. And one way is to do that is coaching. And so, Patty, you mentioned a little bit about your coaching initiative earlier. Can you expand on that and how that's making a difference in Utah?
I would love to, yes.
Chomping at the bit.
Yes, absolutely. Having effective teachers is the keystone. And when you look at our elementary teachers, they do not get a lot of pre-service time in learning how to teach mathematics. They have to be an expert at everything. Our secondary teachers get more time to be the expert in their area, but when we start talking about mathematical coaching, Usually we have administrators who are also not an expert in mathematics. We have teachers who haven't been given that time as well. So what we did, our legislature, again, focused and made it a priority. So not only did they purchase and have funding for the screener, then they also funded the coaching initiative. Now the coaching initiative is for our administrators, it's for our coaches, it's for our instructional coaches, and we have some teachers, we have special education. We're all in. If it's important, you're all in, just like Jeb Bush said this morning. You're all in if it's important. This is important. So within that, it is a coaching cohort, and it lasts for 2 years. So it has to be sustained. If it's not, it can't be a one and done. You can't go to some hurrah and be like, we all need to do some math coaching. Great. What does that look like in mathematics? There is decades and decades and decades of research when it comes to literacy. When it comes to mathematics, not so much. Not so much. And we need that. We need to have, from our policymakers, from Washington on down, to be able to say we need funding for mathematics research as well. The research then informs what we are doing in our coaching institutes. And so with that coaching institute, we bring them in. And for the different audiences that are participating, we let them, for one example, here's an example, our administrators come in, and as they're taking these courses, they are able to have templates and formats of what to look for in the classroom, what questions to ask teachers, what should the students be doing in the classroom? Because we still have some people that think a mathematics classroom should be silent while people are doing that memorization, recitation, step by step by step by step. In the real world, in the world in which conceptual understanding is then applied, there's not a step-by-step. I don't know how many of you have gone into and done any construction work. I'm just finishing a barn right now out in our pasture. So we're finishing a barn, and guess what? The walls aren't square. Has anyone had this problem, or is it just me that's kind of working that's not been square? Okay, walls aren't square. That impacts everything. Everything that I'm doing and using is applying the mathematics I learned. How many of you in here with that coaching model, whatever it is, you've learned it and went out after you did the quadratic formula, because you all learned it. You probably did it with the song, negative b plus or minus, right? I'm not going to sing it because that'd be torture. But how many of you then walked outside that classroom and said, I'm going to use a quadratic formula today? Raise your hand. Raise your hand high. That is why, as a 54-year-old, we have coaching institutes. We have coaching institutes now because our teachers want to do what's best for kids. They take that data because assessments matter. They take that data, they're able to use it and say what is needed, and now we need to coach them on the mathematics so that the students are able to learn it. They want to do what's best. They weren't given the opportunity to learn mathematics at a complex level. Our administrators weren't given the opportunity to be able to say what does that look like in the classroom. They weren't given the opportunity to be able to practice and get it wrong, to go in and do pretend visits and be like, okay, so I think this is what's happening, and then they can do pre-checks, then they can watch a lesson, and then they can go back and practice together on what it really looked like and how did I know mathematics was really happening in the classroom. They're able to do that as cohorts together as teachers. They're able to do that as cohorts together as coaches. And in order to do this, we had to have something that was sustainable. So it's a 2-year model, and with that cohort, they come in 8 different times. 4 times in person for full days, 4 times online for about 3 hours. Sometimes, it's a little bit different, about 3 hours. And then in the meantime, they're able to talk to each other in cohorts, practice, visit each other's classrooms, visit each other's schools, and really make those strong connections. It's important, it's valued. So with those coaching initiatives, we're now in the 2nd cohort that is going on. And in this 2nd cohort, we're now seeing from our 1st cohort these big results. What's important about these big results is that in our legislation, it states that there is an early learning plan, and there's plans for our educators that have to show growth. So now we have a tool, now we have coaching for our folks, and now we have a tool to measure what that looks like. And as we're moving forward, we are able to take them. I'm just so excited. We're able to take those coaching places, and in their early learning plans that have to show growth, we have folks that have gone from 40% proficient all the way up to their 70% proficient in 2 years. And they are excited about their next step because every year they have to show growth. It doesn't end. It doesn't end. Our teachers are saying this is the best professional development that they've had because they got to experience the questioning of being a student. They got to learn math at a whole new level. They got to see and use what it looked like, why a negative times a negative is a positive. Yeah. How many of you just memorized that? Just memorized negative times, okay, right? So they're actually understanding it, and they are understanding those questions firsthand. They're able to go in and see for themselves what that looks like. So coaching is one of the most important things for our educators who are now in. We have too many great quality educators. They did their best at the time, and what they taught at that time was needed for that time. We're now at a different time, and we need new strategies. We need new pedagogical experiences to be able to provide those for our students for the world in which we live today and in the world that is coming at as fast as can be with AI.
Thanks, Patty. A couple of just important points I want to lift up. One, it seems like also, normalize coaching. Like, it's okay. Everybody, $1 million baseball players have coaches. Olympic athletes have coaches. Like, this is how we can help build teacher capacity and competence and content knowledge. So I think that just stood out in your comments. Another one is administrators, including administrators. A lot of times we see policy around teachers, not for the school leaders. That is key. And another one, just a plug, around the more time in ed prep for math content and specific math pedagogical approaches, because we are seeing at NCTQ that not a lot is changing in terms of how much prep programs are covering in elementary math. Why does an aspiring elementary teacher need to take some high-level calculus class? No, they should be focused on that conceptual understanding and really understanding how to teach math. So thank you for those comments. I'm keeping us. We're a little bit behind. So Brenda, shifting to you. But thinking about also the importance of assessment, back to assessment, what are some of the different assessments and North Carolina's approach to assessment and how they're used in automatic enrollment or other policies or actions across North Carolina?
I'll be quick. We have your standard end of grade, end of course from 4th grade through Math 2. No, we have a Math 3. In North Carolina, and we use that because we measure what matters, and that's how we know whether or not kids are being left out. Governor Bush mentioned earlier about the Department of Education, and I will tell you, North Carolina still has those assessments because of the federal requirements. And so as we all collectively think about what we do or do not like about the federal engagement, I think that's one that we need to be really honest about, is the fact that our legislature is really committed to accountability, but it's a hard thing to fight for if you can't have that backing. So that's very important to us. The pushback on this policy also requires data. So the folks who are saying, well, why is Michael not going into that class, really pushing me to somehow put a label on it. And the fact is, again, quoting another Bush, it's the soft bigotry of low expectations. And it's hard to measure, and I don't need to put a label on it. If we have data, we can say, this child belongs in this class. And so when you have the folks coming into Representative Blackwell's office and saying, well, I don't really love little pearl grabbing. I don't really love having these kids in the class. And he can just say, I have the data. It's the proof. So it's incredibly important. And the second thing I'll say, and I love what you're doing with mapping the students, because, well, think about your phones. Everybody here uses maps, right, on their phones to get places. What happens if it can't find the satellites? Right? You get the little circle of death. Oh, I got to get to the airport. I can't get to the airport if my phone doesn't know that I'm at the Omni, right? And it's the same thing with kids. We can't get them where they need to be if we don't figure out where they are. And it's better if we can figure out where they are at every step along the way. So our organization is advocating for competency-based education, not in kind of the really overcomplicated way that a lot of people are doing it, but in the sense of every single student should know which competencies. They should have it ready on their phone or on their computer. They should know their own competencies and which ones are next to get to the next level. And instead of having that end of grade assessment in May, they should be able to take it, the 4th grade assessment, in September of 3rd grade if they like, right? So we need to get to a place where the assessment is more agile, and I'm concerned that we're actually moving away from assessment altogether as opposed to innovating and making sure that swirl of death isn't happening, right?
Thanks, Brenda. So I want to make sure we have enough time to get to Q&A. So as Patrick, we're going to start with you. As we think about the audience here today, in this awesome standing room only room this morning, what actions or advice do you have for the state leaders and the state policymakers that are in this room to take advantage of initiatives or actions? So like 1 minute each. What's your one piece of advice?
Yep. So the conference is called ExcelinEd. Ed, as I imagine, is education. And I think we think of education as schooling. And I would hope everybody here is expanding that definition. That definition should go well beyond school. So when I said culture of achievement in our communities, in our society, and how we're doing it. And one of the things I think we should think about then are three things I think we should think about. Support high-impact tutoring programs. So you should fund it. State legislators should fund high-impact tutoring programs. You should incentivize regional partnerships. We've done it on an economic scale for our cities and for our states. We should do it from an education perspective as well. And the last thing is invest in high-quality, accelerated curriculum. And I think a lot of times when we meet students who can't do the work, the inclination is to just go down and we're going to teach you how to multiply again. There's multiplication in the problem that you need to do now, and we're just going to do that. And so make sure you have those high expectations, incentivize regional partnerships, and invest in the work that incentivizes a culture of education outside of school.
Great. Thank you, Patrick. Brenda?
I mean, this is very simple. Pass this policy. And you'll, Collaborative for Student Success is going to put out a video, and they have the two sponsors. We had a Republican and Democrat co-sponsor this. It was truly bipartisan. And on camera, the thing that they both kept saying is, this is a no-brainer. This is a no-brainer policy. So take advantage of the resources that are about to be available for you. The video, our organization is happy to lean in. If you can't do this one thing, right? So please, it's pass the policy.
Great.
3 paragraphs.
Yeah, super quick, because I've already talked about most of it. 1, if it's important, you put it in policy. If it's in policy, you measure it. If you're going to measure it, then you have to fund it. If you're going to fund it and do those 3 things, you have to celebrate when you're done.
Awesome.
My recommendation is it's very similar to what I would tell my students in the math classroom. Be bold. Take initiative. Leverage your assets that your state has. Every state is doing something. Our 50-state math policy scan, more information will be coming out over the next few months. Every state is doing something with math. So leverage those assets, and then look at places where you have room to grow, and look at other states that stand out as exemplars, and really be bold and make moves in the right direction. Every kid deserves to be mathematically competent, and my final thought is math matters.
Thank you, Lindsay. All right, we have about 10, 12 minutes left for Q&A. I'm sure there's a lot of great wisdom and knowledge to share. So go ahead. Gentleman in the red vest. Can you just stand up and, sorry, I don't know that we have a mic.
So, we have the literacy, how we approach literacy in the 3rd grade test and all that. Should there be something like that for literacy test in a certain grade? And so perhaps all kids back to them. What's going on in the education space?
That's a fantastic question, because I know did you see some parallels between our 6 fundamental principles between math and literacy? Lots of parallels there, lots of overlap. So in literacy, there's a lot of evidence that shows that 3rd grade is the place where you switch from learning to read to reading to learn, right? Mathematics evidence it's different. It's not the same as it is with literacy. There's nothing that we can point to that says this is the inflection point where kids are switching between like I just said about literacy. There's nothing that's analogous in the mathematical space. So you have to be very thoughtful and careful when you implement policies that would hold students back. I think the biggest challenge in mathematics education is that students need access to grade level content. Even if they are behind, they need to have access to the grade level content. Students learn more when they are in on grade level math classes than they would if they would be held back. And that is what the evidence tells us in the math space.
Good question. Apollo, and then we'll go to DM next.
Lindsay, you know I'm a big fan of Utah. And you've done a great job of laying out the what, but to me the success story of Utah is the how you did it in terms of identifying exemplars, you made it feel like it was being done with the education community rather than to the education community. You got a plan, you got a monitoring strategy. That implementation piece that a lot of people, they'll pass a policy and then the implementation falls apart. Can you say a little bit more about Utah's strategy on building that coalition that embraced this stuff, help co-design it, and ultimately help achieve the successes?
Well, thank you so much for the compliment, Paolo. I worked really hard. It was natural because we had a wonderfully thriving community of people who are passionate about math in the state of Utah, and I simply leveraged that community. And just like I talked about how students bring funds of knowledge with them to the classroom, so do our leaders, so do our teachers, so do our students, so do principals, so do our wonderful higher education math partners. And I wanted them to bring their assets to the table, and I wanted us to really hash out those really important questions. What is the way that we teach math in Utah? Let's Utahify this. And the committee committee work is amazing because it takes off all the sharp edges. It doesn't make anything too radical. It makes it palatable. And it might not be the amount of change that I want to make, but we're talking about big systems here. It's incremental change. I like to say it's calculus because I'm a math person. It's incremental change over time. And those all add up to big changes for kids in the long run. So I highly recommend committee work. I love it's amazing when you bring a committee together. You're not only leveraging their funds of knowledge, but then they become like brand ambassadors for the way that you want math to be taught in your state. And they go out and I worked on that document. It's important, and we're going to talk about it, and this is why. And from the state level, to have somebody naturally picking up what you have created and sharing it, it goes so far. It goes so far.
Such a good point on implementation. Go back here, and then we'll come to you, ma'am.
Thanks for this panel, first of all. My name is John White. I was the head of Louisiana's education system for a decade, and I'm on the management team of a company called Great Minds, which makes Eureka Math. So thank you very much for this. I see the world now a little bit through the kind of the private sector side as well as through the regulator side. And I'm struck in this discussion by how ExcelinEd and everything you guys have talked about is kind of rightly adding focus to things beyond the core curriculum. So you're talking about screeners and formative assessments and coaching and tutoring and all these things. And while I think it's good that all those things are part of the discussion, from a teacher's perspective, it does strike me that since the pandemic in particular, just the accrual of stuff that they are having to manage from publishers and vendors and ed techs and so on is a real barrier to coherence and focus and rational time allotment. And so I guess states, because I know many of us here kind of represent the state perspective, should be a source of coherence and focus. Mm-hmm. But this year, 3 of the biggest states in the country, California, Texas, and Florida, are all in some stage of a math adoption. And I would say their approaches to coherence are very, very different. I mean, Texas is taking a perspective that at least offers a platform for real coherence across the product suite. California, I'm not casting aspersions on it, but it feels to be a more conventional, traditional state adoption with core textbook publishers submitting, and it doesn't quite seek the kind of common platform in a way that Texas does. So what is your approach or your thinking about how you rationalize all this? Like, how does a state take all of this stuff and not just end up with 10 different vendors for every classroom, but actually ends up in a place where the teacher can see it as part of a whole? Because it does seem like, as ambitious as this agenda is, it does need to be clear and focused and coherent for the teacher. And that's a lot to ask of a small school board. It's a lot to ask of a principal. It's a lot to ask of a math department chair. It feels like the state is the right unit at which to do some of that rationalizing, but we haven't talked a lot today about just state adoptions and states as regulators.
Okay, that's a great question, and the reason why I appreciate the question is because that has to be a part of the plan as well. So in Utah, we just also have been doing the letters training, which has been awesome, and that's a literacy training for our folks that aren't in the field right now. And so we did letters training, and we're also doing numeracy at the same time. That's a lot to put on teachers' plates. So if you're going to do these giant initiatives, then you have to fund teachers' times. We can no longer expect our teachers to do everything for free just because they're amazing people. We have to give them the time, and we have to pay them for it. We have to build that time into their schedules of when they're currently at schools, and we do a lot of scheduling that goes along with that to make sure that it's a part of their day, not in addition to their day. And that honors the profession as it is now, and it promotes it with that teacher retention. When we talk about state adoptions, we can talk about state adoptions in curriculum. We can also talk about state standards. When we talk about state standards, again, as Lindsay brought on, is we need to bring in the communities to make sure that we're doing what's right across the board, that we're not polarizing one thing against another. In Utah, we do the integrated math approach. Yes, we do. We no longer do the Algebra 1, Algebra 2. We don't do that. We do the integrated approach. It helps our students be able to have that data science that is now being woven into our statewide standards so that kids no longer say, I'm good at algebra, I'm bad at geometry, I'm good at geometry, I'm bad at algebra. We combine it, we bring it in so that our interventions are also cyclical in nature, which helps our teachers be able to have that process of where the students came from and where they're going, instead of this is the content I teach and this is the only class I teach. So when they're having access to those students, of being able to say, here's where they came from, here's where they're going, they're better interventionists in the classroom. And so they also have that ability then to coach each other with what that looks like. In our state, we don't do a statewide adoption of curricular materials. We leave that to the local level. We just make sure they follow a process, and the process is outlined. So we don't do that in the state of Utah of adopting one curriculum. We do adopt one set of standards, and those standards are what they're accountable for in the curriculum that they adopt within their LEAs, local education agencies.
John, if I may respond to your question as well, one of the things I think about when I heard your question was, maybe correct me if I'm wrong here, is that there's so much on teachers' plates, but at the same time, how do certain curriculums gain access to spaces where there's not so much competition? And if I heard that wrong, just correct me. But one of the things I think about is not every school community is the same. So if the state of California says that we want all these players in the game, as a former math teacher myself, I'm looking at, okay, I have to have a core curriculum. I have advanced students, so I'm going to bring in art of problem solving. And that is a lot to handle, but I think it's up to the leader, the local leader, either that's the superintendent or the principal, to develop a viewpoint on what instruction should look like. So I don't think it's on the state to limit the number of curriculum choices in terms of coherence. I do think it's up to the state to make sure that the principals have a framework for selection that allows them to be the truth holders for what coherence looks like in their local districts.
States also have a really great lever to incentivize the adoption of high-quality instructional materials and intervention materials that I think is a really important piece of the equation, too.
Well, I think we need to ask what AI is going to contribute to this, because I think that this whole conversation about lists of curriculum and that should go away. There should be a place. We have teachers who are making up their own materials every single day, making up their formative assessments while they also have mandated assessments, and that would reduce their burden significantly if we had the technology, which is out there already and being used by every other industry, to say, this student needs to know this competency, and here are 50 resources. You can decide as the teacher which one is best for that child. I know every student can learn from every learning style, but sometimes they're just interested in astronomy or ponies or whatever it is. So being able to curate and not be confined to one book or another, or one resource or another, that feels to me like the direction we need to be going, is talking about how do we use AI to curate not whole sets of curriculum, but individual components for individual competencies.
And the last thing I'll just thought about in response to your question is, don't underestimate the value of communication around trying to create that coherence and the role that states can help play in trying to be explicit about opportunities for coherence. All right, last question.
Good morning.
No pressure.
This question is for Lindsay. So as I am studying high-performing countries, and I look at some of the countries are performing highest on PISA. We see that they don't always just have grade levels. They are, they're mixing students up based on the skills. But then I hear we need to make sure that we are giving every student access to grade level materials or content. It's confusing to me. So what are your thoughts with that?
Well, that's a really great question. It goes back to we need to do all the things for every student all the time, every day, right? It's everything. I think it's really an important piece of the conversation in mathematics is to standard set the baseline for what the expectations are for the grade, and every student has a right to have an opportunity to learn those. Just end of story. Now, how they get to that journey, how they get to those end of grade level experiences is where the magic happens, for teachers to step in to really be interventionists. And I talk about interventions in terms of there are always students that already know the grade level content, and there are already students that don't know and need additional help. And so we're talking about these heterogeneous group of students that bring all these amazing funds of knowledge with them, and the teacher has to be prepared, hopefully with data, hopefully with some information from a screener, where they can really individualize and personalize the needs to each of their students and provide those rich experiences based on where students are and where they're going.
I'm going to add to that as well, Dr. K. So I brought up policy, practice, and culture earlier. So looking at other countries can be deceptive. One of the things you'll find in South Korea, students get tutored so much they had to have a cutoff time for tutoring. So if you just look at classroom instruction or state policy, you're not looking at the full picture. The other thing I would think about is other countries have a very robust system for math Olympiads. Our country does too, but we have very low participation rates. And so those other countries have very high participation rates, meaning they're not just doing the math that is offered in school, they're doing the math that keeps their countries competitive mathematically. And so one of the things I would look at is how the culture is built in some of those nations around mathematics, and then seeing how we can build that culture here in the United States.
Thank you. Now, if you will join me in giving our esteemed panel a round of applause.